This is a kitchen island that is basically done and ready for finish. And this is a stack of 8-quarter poplar that I'm going to turn into a farm table. Now I'm pausing that to build this because once this is completed, both of these will be sprayed the same color of milk paint. Step 1 is to mill this lumber into blanks for the legs first. I'm going to have 2 pieces glued together for each one of the legs, and because the legs are basically the shortest distance piece, I went through my stack and found the pieces that have the most cup, bow, or twist, and I'll start with these for the legs. That way I can cut them into smaller sections first at the miter saw, and then remove as little material as possible at the jointer and planer to get them flat and square. With the legs sitting in clamps right there waiting for the glue to dry, I can start on the rails, and these 2 long pieces will be the long rails. That one will be, I think, both of the short rails, I think. But these 2 are the least bowed cup twist that I could find out of the stack. So hopefully I can get some good pieces for the long rails. Now all of the dimensions, I printed off a diagram of what I'm starting with or what I'm wanting to kind of get to, but all of my pieces, I'm actually shooting for the thickest possible dimension, just because there's no sense in milling it down even further. It doesn't make any sense to make it smaller, especially considering this is going to be like a bigger outdoor farm table, kind of a big, bold design. So I'm going to get these to maximum thickness, running through the same process of cross-cutting, jointing, planing, all of that typical woodworking milling process. Well, I've had a very productive morning off camera. I had the leg blanks sitting in clamps over the weekend. It was Friday when I recorded the beginning of this. It is now Monday. So these are ready to go. I've actually squared these 4 sides, cut them to their final length, and we're good to go on these. Now, I did change the dimensions slightly. I was supposed to be 3 1/4 of an inch square, but rather than waste some material, I went with 3 1/4 by 4. So slightly larger. It's going to be a rectangle shaped leg instead of a square. That's totally fine. The rails are done, so now we can start in on the sliding dovetail joinery, and to do that we'll use the Panto router. If you're not familiar with this machine, the quickest explanation is it's a horizontal router that traces templates. So this is an arm that holds a horizontal, or a router in a horizontal orientation. There's a guide bushing up here, or a follower, that allows you to trace the inside and outside of templates that you put up here. The inside of the template produces the female side of the joint, or the mortise. The outside of the template produces the male side of the joint, the tenon. It can be more than just mortise and tenon. In this example, I'm going to use it with a dovetail bit to create both parts of a sliding dovetail. Whatever template you put up here needs to be twice the size of the joint you're wanting to achieve. So in this case, I have it about 10 inches in total length because I want about a 5-inch long sliding dovetail. And I want this to be a sliding dovetail, which means I need to start plunging into the top of the leg and then stop at a specified depth. So I used a segmented template. There's actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different pieces to create this segmented template. This side is stopped, like I said, so I can go into the inside part for the mortise, or the female side of the dovetail, go all the way through and stop at my specified stop location so I don't go too far for the apron rails, and then get back out of it. That's how I do the female side of it. For the male side, I'll change the follower. There's going to be a different size bearing right here, and I'll go to the top. I think there will be anyway. I'll go to the top and trace all the way around it, and then coming back on the bottom side. That'll give me a specified length for the sliding dovetail, the male side of the joint. But we're going to start with the female side. I took the time to dial in the setup, and I found a few things that I needed to change. First was with these templates. Instead of having a bunch of segments and then just stopping off into space, I took off all of those multiple smaller segments and added 2 really long segments with that same end stop over here. What this allows me to do is get it into the mortise mode, or the female side of the dovetail joint, lock this follower in place, and now it physically cannot drop. There's no elevation change that can occur because this is beyond the travel of the actual machine. And I like that because if I'm doing the mortise side of the joint or the female side of the joint, I want to have as much of the material as possible on the table of the machine, and therefore the bit actually goes onto the table a little bit. And if I didn't have that stop, what I was finding is I would have to manually hold this up in air as the bit stops, and I don't want to run into a situation where I just forget to do that and then drop it, then it plunges into the table, and then I scream like a little girl because I'm upset and all that good stuff. So instead, just extended the templates. So I think I have all this dialed in with all the followers that I need. Let me show you the fit that I achieved. Here's the female side of the joint, so this will be on the leg, and then of course the male side on the rail. Now, of course, you need to make sure that the dovetail fits properly, right? So there's height adjustments and all that to make sure that you have the actual sizing right. But in this case, because it is a stopped dado dovetail, because it is a stopped dovetail, we need to stop it in such a way that when the rail is in place, you won't have any hanging down below and see that. So the depth or the length of it is important as well. As far as fit goes, I want a pretty darn snug fit that I can put together by hand. So in this case, that's pretty good, right? So if I'm using PVA glue, that's probably too tight because PVA glue is water-based glue. It's going to expand the joint and make it more difficult to put together. But I want it to be too tight for PVA glue so that I can use a glue that lubricates the joint as it's being assembled, like epoxy or hide glue. I'll probably go with epoxy, considering this is going to be an outdoor project. But that is the satisfying joint. For the female side of the joint, or the mortise side of the joint, I had to adjust the height of this template holder here a couple different times. For the male side, all of these pieces are going to be perfectly centered on all of the stock. And remember, this is a 2-to-1 reduction, so whatever is up here is going to be half on the table. So if I want this perfectly centered, what is doubled up perfectly centered? Well, it's the entire thickness. So I've already got this stop calibrated when I set up the machine so that I can use my material thickness as a stop, or as a height adjustment, I guess you could say. Lock this down, and now no matter what I do to this male side of the template over here, it'll be perfectly centered on this size material, which is an offcut from my rails. What makes this machine so darn accurate is you can dial in an exact thickness of your tenon with these tapered templates. So closest to the scale right here, the template is thickest, and furthest away from that scale, it is the thinnest. That means you can use your guide bearing or your follower, whatever you want to call this, and get it closest to the scale for the thickest tenon, and over here for the thinnest. What's really cool about these templates is they all have lines on them. So I positioned the camera so you could see these lines over here. However, right at the bottom of the screen, I think those are showing up the best. There's 3 lines on the top of all these templates, and you can very easily set your follower to those reference lines for quick and easy setups. If you're doing this repeatedly over and over again with the same joinery, and you're swapping these out for the mortise and then the tenon, for example, this is the follower for the mortise. You can see the size difference, and this is the follower for the tenon. So you're going to have to swap these out occasionally if you batch out a bunch of this stuff. So you could either put a stop collar on here so that it goes in the arm and stops at a specified distance if you really want to dial this in and you have repetition over and over again. In my case, I believe the second line to the left, or the one right here, I think that was my setup line. So I'm going to put this back in, do some tests, and once I get it calibrated, dialed in, then I will batch out all of my pieces. kind of hard to see it without any color on it because the wood grain makes this kind of blend. But on this kitchen island, which the table is built to match, all the corner legs as well as the intermediate legs in the middle have a chamfer on all exposed edges, and it's a stopped chamfer. It stops from the top, stops from the bottom. I'm going to do the same thing on all the table legs, and I'll start it 7 inches from the top, and I believe it's 3 inches from the bottom. I already have the router bit set up in the router table from when I made these, the chamfer bit, so let's just jump over there and we'll get started. Same setup from when I made the island legs, so same router bit height, same fence position. Only thing I changed is the start and stop lines on the fence. So I'm not going to change anything else, not going to change the height. I'm just going to run this as it is and see if the chamfers look appropriate for the size of the leg. Although the bottom of the legs will never touch the ground, which I'll talk about in just a second, I still want to add a chamfer all the way around the bottom edge. Now typically you would do this to prevent dragging the table and the corners snagging and a big old chunk of tear out happening. That's why you would typically route the bottom edge. It's not going to matter in this case, but I still want to do it. The reason why the bottom of the legs will never touch the ground is because I'm using a galvanized carriage bolt as a leg leveler. And as you can see, I just pushed it right in this hole. I'm using these Wood Whisperer thread taps, and I'm not dogging these by any means. These are really good taps for wood. However, this particular situation, in the end grain of poplar's pretty soft wood, it just rips out. No matter what size pilot hole I go with, it just rips right out. So it is what it is. I'm not going to use the larger bolts that I wanted to use, and instead I'll use basically my go-to method that I've used for years. This is the cheapest way to add leg levelers. No need to buy a fancy kit or anything. 5/16/18 T-nut and a 5/16/18 carriage bolt. I'll use galvanized in the actual application. This one is not galvanized, but it's the only one I could show you here. Basically, you drill a hole the same diameter as this shank right here, and the barbs will grab into the wood as you pound that in place. The T-nut will stick with the leg, and then you can adjust the level as necessary. Like I said, the easiest and most inexpensive way to add leg leveling to basically anything. If you've never tried using a sliding dovetail joint for a table rail to leg connection, give it a try because assembly is super easy and non-frustrating, especially if you're using a lubricating glue like I am. So I'm using epoxy for this, and it really just makes the joint slide together. If you're using a PVA-based glue, which I previously mentioned, it's going to swell the joint, and that's where you get into some frustration and you're pounding on stuff. This, not so much. Everything just slides together like it should. And honestly, the most difficult part of this glue up has absolutely nothing to do with the glue up and everything to do with the fact that I knew that I was going to record this shot with me working over there and me talking over here, and there's somewhere along the wall is an imaginary line that you're not allowed to cross, and swinging this long rail around. Or navigating around the long rail, excuse me, that was the most difficult part of the glue up. So, sliding dovetails, thumbs up. All right, it is the next morning. The epoxy is done doing what it's supposed to do. The dovetail joints are still doing what they're supposed to do. And we are left with a nice solid table assembly, nice solid table frame. 3 things left to do: interior rail, tabletop hold down clip slots, and the leveling feet. I'll probably do the leveling feet after I spray finish on this because I have to do it to the other piece as well, the kitchen island. But this particular interior brace. So these long rails need to remain parallel long term. And here in Mississippi, the humidity changes so much, super high humid most of the time, and then we always go into like a 1-month drought, and that's where we're currently at, so it's kind of low humidity. Basically, no matter what happens, wood will move, and move a lot where I live. So I always position these long rails, whenever possible, to have the bow facing in. This is an 80-something, 85-inch long piece of wood, both of these are, and I think we have about a 1.5 millimeter bow. So not much at all, but enough to be detectable. And here's how it's detectable. This particular rail, as you can see, fits down in between the long rails. As a matter of fact, there's about a millimeter gap. So this is actually shorter than what it needs to be. And that's right here at the joints. If I come here in the middle, you can see that I position the rails so that they bow in because I have a 2 or 3 millimeter overhang right here that I have to pull the rails apart, and then that'll fit in place. So why have them bow in versus bow out? Well, if I have them bowed out, then I'll have to clamp them together onto that board while I drive the screws. I'm using pocket hole screws to secure this. There's 2 on my side and then 1 on the side that you can see. And as soon as I take that clamp off, then we're relying on just the screw threads themselves to keep these 2 boards parallel. If you're stuck with a grain orientation where you have to have it where it bows out, that's acceptable. But it's better if you have the leeway as far as the grain orientation to have them bow in, because then you are no longer relying on the screw threads to be doing all of the work. In this case, the forces squishing this board is never going to be great enough to cause damage to this board. So gravity will just hold this in place, right? And then we have the screws to just kind of lock its position. The screws aren't really doing a lot of the work. In this case, the compression on this board is doing all of the work to make these 2 pieces remain parallel. So I'm going to go ahead and install this really quick, and then after that, I'm going to use the biscuit joiner to cut a bunch of random slots that I'll use with tabletop hold-down clips to secure this, to secure the top to the base once I get to that point. A quick note about these tabletop hold-down clips or tabletop hold-down fasteners. It's important that you install these properly so they actually do what they're supposed to do. My very first table, I did not have the distance from the slot to the tabletop set appropriately, and it was too shallow, and therefore this dug into the slot rather than sliding on the slot. I had to go back and change some stuff. I buy these in bulk. This is a bag of 96 because this is just such a handy solution to attach any tabletop to any table apron rails. And yeah, this is what I always use. So in this case, the distance from here, the slot, to the tabletop, picture this just being upside down for the assembly process, needs to be 9/16 of an inch for this particular clip. Every one of these clips that I've reordered over the years, 9/16 is the go-to distance. And what that allows is, well, first off, as you can see, if I push this parallel with the tabletop, you'll see that this arm right here is not parallel, it's on a downward angle. So if we install this so that the screw bottoms out this bottom section with the tabletop, then this will point down, and that's not what you want, because it'll dig into the slot and not allow for it to slide back and forth. What you want is, if I set this in place, you can see, I'll angle this out, that this piece of metal is parallel with the bottom of the slot so that it can slide in and out with expansion and contraction. There's a hole right here, so a screw is going to go into the clip, into the tabletop, pinning the clip to the tabletop. Then expansion and contraction is allowed as it slides back and forth like so. If you don't see a gap down here, and if you do see a gap up here, it's wrong. You need to have the gap down here so that there's constant downward pressure with the screw, and this needs to be parallel up there so it's allowed to slide back and forth. I don't know if I've said it previously, but this table and this kitchen island setup are going to have a matching top, so I'll cover building both of those in the same video. I still need to add the leveling feet to this and the leveling feet to that, and I'll do that at the same time after they've both been sprayed. I still need to spray both of these with a milk paint. I'm using General Finishes Tuscan Red milk paint, so this is going to be fun. And then also, I don't have any drawer pulls or door pulls on the island, and I don't have the bottom trim all the way around this table apron, because both of those, or all of that I should say, is going to again match the top as well. So I'll put an image on the screen. You can kind of get an idea of how this is going to turn out when it's all said and done as far as the table goes, and you can see the thin strip of accenting wood along the bottom. So that'll be covered in an upcoming video. What else is there to cover? I think that's it. I've got to button up a couple more things off camera on the island. Tomorrow I've got some friends coming over, and I'm exchanging their labor helping me move these out to spray for my labor helping do some CNC work. So that's it. Busy week. You guys take care. Have a great day, and I'll talk to you in the next video.